Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today we're talking about One Piece again. Can you tell I've been rewatching One Piece recently? Actually, this whole thing is on backlog, so I don't know when these videos are going to go out, but uh, I've been rewatching One Piece recently, and it is damn good. But today, we're going to be doing another episode where we talk about one of the most well written characters in all of fiction, Sanji Vinsmoke. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't read Whole Cake Island yet or watched it. I mean, the anime's caught up past that point, right? I don't know. Sanji is the fourth person that Luffy recruits to his crew, and uh, with him, that makes 5 members on their team when they sail into the Grand Line for the very first time. You would think that since he's named Sanji, he would have been the third person they recruited, but what do I know? I mean, he is the third strongest, so there's that. For anyone who doesn't know, and it will become relevant later, San is, or Sanj, it's how you pronounce it kind of depends on context. But anyway, uh, Sanji's name basically just means 3 in Japanese. Um, yeah. And honestly, I'm fairly certain the reason he was named Sanji is because they always planned, or Oda had always planned the Vinsmoke thing as like a send off um, to Power Rangers and whatnot, and he just had that in his back pocket for all these fucking years, and we never fucking knew it. And man, that guy is dedicated. So when we first meet Sanji, we don't know about his family heritage. We meet him as the sous chef on the restaurant Baratier, working under the head chef, Blackfoot Zeph, who, you know, used to be a pirate on the Grand Line before leaving and losing a leg and becoming a cook, just a regular cook. During this little mini arc that takes place over the course of like 5 or 6 episodes, we get to see Sanji rescue a man who's dying from hunger. Actually, 2 of them. And we get to see the backstory on why he would do that, even though the people who are dying of hunger are vicious criminals who will probably come back to murder him. He also displays the fact that he is a complete womanizer and the suavest MF chain smoking cook you will ever see. Sanji is clearly a parody slash like rendition of the like stereotypical French chef thing. Like he's a gentleman, he's a chain smoker, he's a ladies' man, he's a goofball, um, and he always does his best to look absolutely fucking badass at all times. Um, Varying degrees of success there. And the first great thing about Sanji that we're introduced to is his compassion, right? He's brutal and cruel to people who are cruel. And he doesn't have to take shit from anyone. But he also goes out of his way to give food to a starving man because he is a starving man. And it doesn't really matter who the man is or what the consequences of that act may end up being. He has an obligation to feed the hungry because he knows what it's like to starve, which we don't know about until we get to his flashback, but yeah, um, it's pretty crazy. As this little section goes on, we see him be progressively more. What's the word? Well, there's not a single good word for it, but basically he shows off his suave side and his aloof side a lot over the next couple of chapters, while we get to see him going about his daily work in the Baratier. It's clear that he has a lot of shit on his mind and that he's, here despite everyone's complaints, and that despite everyone's complaints, he's probably the best cook there. Then, when the big battle happens, we get his flashback sequence where we get to see him as a young child experience true starvation, even though he was the only one on the island who got any food to begin with, and the old man did didn't. And and even though the old man was a pirate, and neither of them would have been stranded there if the pirate ship hadn't attacked, right? Sanji feels super guilty about the old man giving up his leg and his dream and his food so that Sanji could live. And with both of them on the brink of starvation, they're finally rescued and able to set up their restaurant and build a life together. And that was 8 years ago. We don't know how old Sanji is. We don't know how old Sanji is in this flashback, but we do know that it was 8 years ago. And we also don't know anything about what happened to Sanji's life before he became a cook's assistant on a ship in the middle of the East Blue. We don't know how he got there or why. It's not really presented as a question, though. You just kind of take it as a given that, maybe his dad worked there or something. Who knows? Whatever, right? Maybe he was just an orphan kid and this was the only job he could get. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. He does have a pre-established obsession with finding the All Blue, a mystical sea that has fish from all over the world swimming together, ready to be cooked by a great chef. I mean, in truth, I don't really think that's a thing that chefs dream about. I've never met someone who cooks food on the reg and they're just like, man, I wish I could live in a place that has all the different kinds of things to cook. Because, you already have plenty of different kinds of things to cook just with what's in your region. And if you need something else, you can import it. And, it just seems like a weird thing for a cook to want, but whatever. That's his dream, that's what he wants. So that's what he's going for. Then, throughout the rest of the story, Sanji sets himself up as one of the most important characters. Firstly, as mentioned before, he's the third strongest combatant on the crew, and he always gets a solo fight against the third strongest enemy opponent, which, whatever. It's anime, that's how it works. But more importantly, as somewhat befits his character, he's always kind of smooth talking his way through the background of things. In Alabasta, he ends up getting separated from the crew on a couple of different occasions, and each time he takes on the persona of Mr. Prince and just absolutely saves the fucking day. The first time it happens is on Little Garden when he gets separated from the crew and stumbles across the hut where Mr. 3 had set up shop and gives conflicting commands to Crocodile. Then later on, when basically everyone else is trapped in a cage in Crocodile's dungeon, he's not. And he doesn't have a wanted photo yet, so he gets to walk in and let them free, basically. Even when they do eventually make a wanted photo of him, it doesn't look very much like him. It's kind of hand-drawn and goofy. So he still ends up being one of the few members of the crew who can walk around undisguised and get away with it, which is kind of cool. and really helps the crew out in a couple of tight spots. We also see the themes of chivalry and, giving food to the hungry and not wasting any food come up a lot in his story over the years. Although, admittedly, mostly in filler arcs. Right? Like, when you're watching the anime and you see Sanji, like, they're in Navarone and he's in a cooking competition with the chef, right? That that's not canon, right? When they like sneak onto a marine ship to help some cabin boy make a better soup, that's not canon, you know. When like every time Sanji gets to like show off his cooking skills, you know, cooking battle style, and it's always a non-canon thing. Even the even the cooking contest in Logport, Rogueport, Logtown. That's it. Even the cooking contest in Logtown wasn't in the manga, although admittedly that was only because uh, Oda had to skip a few things in order to hit the grand line on chapter 100. But he did originally intend for those events to happen, and that's why Usopp gets his goggles, even though he never had that confrontation with Daddy the Father in the manga. Um, so I do consider those things to be canon, even though they were not in the manga. It's a weird situation, and it's kind of weird that Oda would skip past important character moments in order to get to the grand line faster, especially since there's a lot of faffing about when they first get to the grand line, but whatever. Sanji also adds a great comedic chemistry to the group as a whole. A lot of his time spent on the screen is spent bickering with Zoro or swooning over Nami and Robin, or just having the most ridiculous reaction to everything because sometimes he's the straight man and sometimes he's the funny man. um, like whenever characters are being childish, he's one of the straight man characters. But whenever someone's being pervy, he's one of the funny man characters. So he has a really good role in the group dynamic and can switch and can fit nicely with any of the other group members. If he's hanging out with Brooke or Frankie, they make raunchy jokes with each other. If he's hanging out with Nami and Robin, they're having this ridiculous attempt at romance that neither of them will ever reciprocate. When he's hanging out with Luffy and Chopper and Usopp, they do something ridiculous and he kicks them on the head for it. And truthfully, these interactions between crew members is one of the greatest things about One Piece, and the fact that each of the crew members has a role that they can play overall and a different way that they fit in with each other to create a more varied group dynamic no matter who happens to be on panel. It's brilliant. But even in that lineup, Sanji is one of the more flexible characters that you can move around between the different subgroups. And for a long time, that was all there really was to Sanji. He'd have endless moments of badassitude and a handful of moments of being a dumb pervert. And then a handful of moments where he, just like kindly feeds someone or defends a woman's honor or whatever. And then back to being a pervert and then back to being a badass and just kind of cycling through that for a while. And admittedly, a lot of these individual moments do feel really good on their own, And it's worth noting that he is every bit as devoted to the crew as Zoro is. For example, when they're on Thriller Bark and what's his face? Kuma shows up. When Kuma shows up and he's gonna just fucking kill everyone, Zoro's like, hey, no, take me instead of Luffy, right? And Sanji's like, fuck that, Zoro, take me instead. Zoro doesn't let him, of course, and Admittedly, as far as like the whole bearing of pain trial, Zoro's probably the only one who could have. Let's be real here. But Sanji was just as ready to jump into that fire, um, and and he even made sure that no one knew what Zoro had done, so that his sacrifice wouldn't be diminished. And like, man, what a fucking power move, bro. The two of them bicker like crazy, but they really are great allies and they depend on each other and work together really, really well. At the same time, though, Sanji isn't afraid to know his limits. You know, of course, he's always there to help when people need help and step up for the big battle. But also, like, he recognizes that he's not there to fight the final boss. He's there to fight the third underling of the final boss, and and Luffy gets to fight the final boss, right? And he understands that and follows through with it. You know, there are times, for example, in Arlong Park when characters need when like Luffy is underwater, and a few of the other characters need to like stand up to Arlong for a minute so they can get Luffy out. But but you know, he wasn't like trying to take that fight for his own. I mean, he knew he couldn't, but like, you know. Point is, he understands his place in the group very well, and he follows that place really effectively. And he's fine playing a supporting role as a chef and as a combatant. And it's like really cool to see a character who's just like comfortable with that and handles it the way they should. For a long time, Sanji was my favorite character just because he's so fucking cool. The way he kicks the shit out of everything. Like, oh, man. Um, you know, and his intro is very powerful. Like the desire to feed people because you know what it's like to starve. Yeah, I can relate to that. I've been there. But there were also times when Sanji's character really got the shaft. Um, you know, for example, on Thriller Bark, he has this whole fight sequence with the dude who can turn invisible, and he gets so upset that that happened because he wanted to be invisible so he could peep on girls. Never mind the fact that this kind of brings up a continuity error because Sanji didn't know what devil fruits were when he first got introduced to the story, but whatever. It's a cheap joke about someone being a pervert, therefore it must be in your manga. I hate that shit, honestly. And then his training sequence for the 2 year time skip was just him running from cross dressers because cross dressers freak him out. And wow, seriously? Like, okay, Oda, that's cool. And then when they finally get back from the time skip and go to Fishman Island, well, the plot line kind of revolves around him getting such a horrible nosebleed that he almost dies simply because hot mermaid girls exist. Like like it's kind of interesting and kind of funny that they turned the nosebleed gag into like a plot point, but at the same time it's just like a really dumb joke. And again, it ties back into the whole he's scared of cross-dressers and has been surrounded by them for 2 years, so now seeing a real woman makes him like die almost. um it's a little bit ridiculous. But then we get past this. We get past that and we go to Whole Cake Island. So prior to Whole Cake Island, the crew went to Punk Hazard. And at Punk Hazard, they caught a bad guy, teamed up with another pirate crew, the Heart Pirates, headed by Law, and agreed that as a team they would go and beat the shit out of Kaido, starting with his supplier of smile artificial devil fruits, Doflamingo, right? And in order to do this, they have to kind of split up because there's also these samurai who have some forces they want to bring to the fight with Kaido, but they have to go like get them first. So some of the Straw Hat crew go with that, and some of them go to Dressrosa, and there's this whole big thing. And um, yeah. Also, at this point in the story, Luffy is already pissed off Big Mom majorly, so she kind of interrupts their journey a bit too. And while it seems like they're setting up Big Mom to be an antagonist further on down the line, or possibly on their way to Kaido, something crazy happens to Sanji while everyone else is doing shit on Dressrosa. He leaves the crew. He just straight up leaves the crew. Because apparently, Big Mom has summoned him to get married to one of her daughters. And if he doesn't, she'll kill everyone he cares about, including the people at the Baratier who definitely could not defend against Big Mom. So he abandons his crew and goes to get married to this seemingly nice girl named Pudding. And thus begins the most Sanji-focused arc in Sanji Land. So much Sanji, some people might not be able to handle it. Some other characters do get good screen time. Specifically, Luffy and Nami get a lot. Brooke has a nice little tussle with Big Mom because they both have spirit-based powers, so that's kind of interesting. And Jinbei finally joins the crew at the very end. And some of the like animal people that we meet on Zhao or Zhao or however the fuck you're supposed to pronounce that. The minks that they show up, but they're not like that interesting to talk about. They just are kind of there, and they get superpowers under the full moon because fuck it, why not? I mean, you know, it's not like they weren't already really powerful and with all their lightning abilities and shit. You know, just give them a fucking full moon boost too. Fuck it, who cares? But beyond those, it's mostly Sanji most of the time. And for good reason. This story tells us what happened to Sanji before he wound up on that ship that Zeph raided. And it tells us why the Big Mom pirates are the way they are, and why Sanji's family is the way they is, and how these two groups are going to interact moving forward. And also, you know, how Luffy's going to completely fuck that up because he's Luffy. So basically what happened is the Vinsmoke family, who were basically just evil Power Rangers, have a bunch of cool technology stuff, and they decided to form an alliance with one of the four emperors so that they could gain like political power or whatever. And in this quest they decided, yeah, let's marry off the one child we do not care about at all in order to get there, which is Sanji. So basically Sanji's mom was being genetically experimented on to make all of her kids into super mutant super soldiers, and she took a potion to try and counteract that, and Sanji is the only one who ended up not having super mutant superpowers, and his sister is the only one who ended up not being blatantly evil 100% of the time. You know, besides Sanji, of course. And then Sanji just like started cooking for his mom because it was the only thing that made her happy, and that's why he loves cooking. And she's the one who told him about the fucking all blue and shit, and like, oh, it's heartbreaking. Eventually his mom dies, and his dad locks him in a cage with an iron mask on his head, like he's in fucking 14th century France or some shit. And and then you know, when they're moving across oceans, his sister lets him out of the cage and the mask so that he can run away and start a new life far away from them. But now they've caught up to him. But also now, he's a total fucking badass. All right, he can kick the shit out of all of them, and he even like kind of comes to blows with them a little bit. Um, the thing is, though, he's handicapped. Like they put these explosive wrist collars on him, and you know, like they've got people he loves being threatened, and it's just a whole mess, right? So he doesn't really get to, you know, have that cathartic moment of beating the shit out of his childhood bullies, who were also his family. Um, and instead mostly just has to kind of civilly deal with them while also getting acclimated to Big Mom's world, which is a whole mess, right? He seems to be getting along well with Pudding, and the first few times we see her, she seems like a perfectly nice girl who really does want Sanji to love her and live happily ever after. And of course, she's hot, so Sanji's down with that. But but then we find out that she is actually a Triclops and therefore evil because, you know, pretty people can't be evil. Sanji eventually finds out that they're planning to kill him at the wedding because, duh, and runs back to Luffy. Oh, I forgot to mention the most emotionally terrifying moment of the entire fucking saga. Okay, so, Luffy and Nami come to the island and they have to fight through Big Mom's minions for like an entire night and day on their way to where Sanji is. And Luffy, after fighting non-stop this whole time, finally gets this one cracker bastard to just bite the dust and moves on. And then they run across Sanji on his way into Big Mom's place. And Luffy tries to talk to Sanji and figure out what's going on and, you know, convince him to come back. And Sanji gets out of the carriage, because of course there's a fucking carriage, and beats the shit out of Luffy. Luffy, of course, isn't fighting back, otherwise this would be a one-sided slaughter. But Sanji absolutely, mercilessly destroys him on every level. Just so much damage. It's insane. And at the end of it, Luffy does what Luffy always does and absolutely rips your fucking heart out in like 2 lines that say so much. And the reason I didn't talk about this moment in Luffy's episode is because I was going to talk about it here, so shut up. But basically he just says, I'm not leaving this spot and I'm not eating another thing until you cook it for me because you're my chef and I won't eat anyone else's food. I'll starve to death. And you know he fucking will too. Even though Luffy's like number 1 weakness is food, he fucking will. Of course, later that night, in the pouring rain, a bunch of bad guys show up to fight Luffy. And even though he takes out as many as he possibly can, he's still weak from hunger and having the shit beat out of him from Sanji, and having stayed up for like 3 whole days fighting constantly. And he eventually goes down. He takes a hell of a lot of them with him, though. And gets locked into a cell. Later, Jinbei lets him out, and there's this whole escape sequence where he desperately tries to get back to that spot because he promised Sanji that's where he would be. But when Sanji realizes that he's going to die, and he goes home and accidentally finds himself making like the food that everyone else on the crew would want to eat, he he realizes where he really wants to be and goes back to that spot. Of course, Luffy's still in the cage at this point, and they don't cross paths here. But yeah, it's it's heavy, man. It's real fucking heavy. Well, shortly after this really heavy moment, they do manage to meet back up with each other and start like working on a way to fix everything. So Luffy eats again, finally, and ends up setting up with Gang Burge to assault the wedding banquet, so that he can land one good wallop on Big Mom and pull Sanji out of there. Meanwhile, Sanji goes back to be the groom, and when it comes time for him to marry Pudding, she's supposed to kill him, but instead she reveals her true self, and gets all ready to do it, and he's just like, oh damn, you really are beautiful. And she just like melts in that moment, because of fucking course she does. um but whatever, that little bit of hesitation, because he's like the first person who's ever been kind to her and complimented her on her appearance after seeing her weird third eye thing that like everyone else dislikes. I mean, in general, the Big Mom Pirates are like super toxic to each other in a way that doesn't really make sense, since they all grew up with a similar level of pain and tyranny. You'd think they'd have like a camaraderie together under that system, but whatever. And basically, throughout this arc, we get to see a lot of sides of Sanji that we don't normally see. We get to see him be soft. We get to see him be sad. We get to see his past and his acceptance that his future may not be what he always wished it would be. And that's like simultaneously beautiful and soul crushing, because like at once he's being, the perfect gentleman, and falling into his new life with a great girl. Well, she seems great, even though it's an act. But he's also like giving up his dreams and abandoning his friends, and like he's partially doing it to protect them, sure, but like it still sucks. More than anything else, we get to see in this arc that Sanji is human. He's able to make mistakes, he's able to cry, he's able to want contradicting things at the same time. He's able to put others ahead of himself, he's able to be selfish. It's a whole hot mess of character development, and like honestly, I hope a lot of the other Straw Hats get a similar level of depth added to them, because holy shit, like before this, Sanji was a cool character, but after this, he's a deep character, and that's so much better. um it kind of seemed like Wano was going to be like that for Zoro, maybe, and maybe it still can be. The Kaido battle has yet to play out fully, but mostly Zoro hasn't gotten a whole lot of spotlight during Wano. Um, eh. But ultimately, while there are a lot of characters that do deserve more character development in this story, I'm really glad that it happened to Sanji. You know, um, and while the rest of his family may have been total bastards, he turned out all right. And in the end, they were grateful for his help, and even gave him a cool, badass suit of armor that highlights his abilities. And, I mean, he's only used it once, and not even for very long, but yeah, it's neat. It's about all there is to say about it. I think the great thing about Sanji as a character is that he's so human. He has obvious flaws, and he's clearly built to be a caricature of a stereotype, and yet he still feels fun and engaging to see on screen. He's still important to the plot. He still, has a lot of badass moments and a lot of silly moments and a lot of moments where you just think, man, that guy's so fun to be around. Um, and that's a really hard thing to do in a character, especially a tertiary character. You know, he's not the protagonist, he's not the second in command, you know, he wasn't even the third or fourth person introduced. He was the fifth member of the crew, you know, if you count Luffy, fourth if you don't. Um, and I mean, like, yeah, it's a little bit ridiculous that Oda is able to make a character that feels so genuine and authentic and connectable, you know, even though it's a tertiary character who doesn't get anywhere near as much screen time as some others and who, you know, is there for very specific plot reasons, but it still feels like genuine and great, and it's really freaking cool. Um, so yeah, Sanji's a good character, and I definitely appreciate all of the development he got in Whole Cake Island and all of the cool moments he had leading up to that. And I really do like that he's included in this story. I honestly couldn't imagine it without him. So, yeah, go Sanji. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Bye. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you have any things to say about it, leave those in the comments section. If you like the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, share the video, tell your friends, start a cult, sacrifice your firstborn and paint their skull golden. I don't know, not that last bit. No human sacrifices. I'm legally liable. No, none of that shit. But, you know, I got Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. I stream on Mondays. I also have a Patreon, but the obvious caveat with Patreon is you never donate to anyone unless you have money to burn. And if you have money to burn, then why not donate to a charity instead? I've got a few linked in my description at all times. I'm not affiliated with any of them, obviously, but yeah, I just thought they were cool. So, you know, thanks for watching.